Like, like that is not my extremism that I need to protect. It's my mundanity. That's what I feel is most sort of, I'm just a sort of a bloke from Essex, from a single parent family. That's a pretty comprehensive show off.
Yeah.
So that's like, I suppose if there's anything being protected, it's that. Oh, and also I raped someone once.
But yeah, you've got the insecurity.
I killed her after.
She'll never tell.
Caprice, are you wearing one of your own bras? I mean, I know it's your bra. I'm sure you didn't nick it from a public lavvy. But I mean, are you in a bra designed by you now?
No, but I'm wearing my knickers.
Get them off.
Okay.
There won't be a point where I go, oh, don't. There'll be a point where I go, go on in. Come on! Everyone does it. Don't be afraid of your own sexuality. Do be a bit afraid of mine, though.
Do you ever think about lad culture? 2010's toxic masculinity realness, gym tan and laundry, vodka revs, cheeky Nandos, rampant, barely concealed misogyny with a layer of plausible deniability through ironic humour? Easy, love. I was just joking. Just a bit of banter, innit? Just to hide the violence you just implied towards the people standing right in front of you. Lad culture. Cheeky chappies. Just having a laugh. Don't take it so seriously, love, right? Lad culture. Yeah, not gonna lie, guys. This is gonna be a dark one. On the 16th of September 2023, Channel 4 in the UK aired a special episode of Dispatches called Russell Brand in Plain Sight. The documentary is very much worth watching if you have the stomach to hear the vile things Brand is accused of, and the lengths to which the former comedian turned YouTube shock jock went to keep conveyor belts of vulnerable women and girls in his orbit to prey on. The title obviously refers to the way in which Russell Brand's behaviour went unremarked upon by much of the media. Brand was open throughout most of his career about his drug addiction and later his sex addiction, and was constantly making jokes in a come on love, it's just a bit of banter sort of way about all the horrific things that he had done and intended to do.
So well dressed, people think he must be gay.
No.
Look at his wonderful haircut, he must be gay. Look how sensitive and vulnerable he is, he must be gay.
That's right.
That means women feel safe around me, they trust me, then bang, pregnant, bang, pregnant, bang, pregnant. Here you go, love. Be careful, because that's a low-cut dress.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I'm only flesh and blood. I've got instincts.
Oh, okay.
What do you think that gesture means, the way you're touching that bottle? What does that indicate? What is that? What's the subtext of that?
I think we gotta go to break.
You need to lose that ring, Mika, because it don't mean nothing to you.
There's chest hair.
It's a landscape.
It's a landscape.
What's going on your landscape?
A little bit of sunburn. Look at him go. Look at them nipples.
He could lactate any moment. Right, Liz, goodbye.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, it's been really a wonderful experience. See you later, Liz.
Russell.
All right, take care. Russell, I can undo your bra just like this. Liz, I love you.
You've thrown me, but
Don't
I love
worry.
it. I love that you're throwing me.
If you're ever so confused, Fifi Box, pop yourself down on my knee and see if we can't get you pregnant.
From his stand-up comedy bit about making girls choke on his Johnson, to his infamous tweet, after all the years of free orgasms, a chance for teenagers to give me something back, to offering up his assistant to Britain's most famous nonce outside the royal family, Jimmy Savile, for sexual favours live on air.
It'd be very nice to meet you one day, Mr. Jimmy Savile, just, you know.
If you've got a sister, you could meet me by bringing her along.
I mean, I haven't got any sisters, but...
I don't usually meet fellas, but if you've got a sister, that's okay.
I've got a personal assistant called Marsha, and part of her job description is that anyone I demand she greets, meets, massages, she has to do it. She's very attractive, Jimmy.
Well, that's a good start.
What kind of
start? You could send her along to do some research.
Would you like her to wear anything in particular, Sir Jimmy?
I'd actually prefer her to wear nothing.
Right. So you want Marsha, my assistant, to meet you naked? Okay. Well, that's not going to be a problem.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that, Jimmy. It's just
the last time I spoke like this was to Father Christmas.
It turns out, in his private life, this ironic misogyny was not ironic at all. And he was going so far as to wait outside of a teenager's school to drive her to his house for, well, you can guess. Perhaps to my detriment, I assumed, on a personal level, that he wouldn't be the subject of this documentary when the rumours were floating around that this Dispatches episode would be about a high-profile UK comedian. Partially because Russell Brand hasn't been considered high-profile or a comedian for years, unless you're a big fan of the British contingent of QAnon, and partially because, well, obviously he was like this in my head. But that's part of the problem. People like Brand, and there are loads of people like him, especially in male-dominated industries like the comedy scene, hide in plain sight precisely by towing that line, where plausible deniability of being the predator that Catherine Ryan tried to call him out as on TV, only for producers to cut it, thereby being complicit, and is continuing to fly under the radar, works to keep people who want to see him as innocent of the crimes he kept basically admitting to doing on camera, seeing him as just one of the lads, a cheeky chappy, a Shagger of the Year, a title bestowed upon him by those wise wizards in the British press. On the other hand, those of us who find that misogynistic behaviour a red flag can sometimes fall into the trap of assuming that everyone else sees those red flags too. And they don't. In fact, I was convinced the Dispatches would be about someone else who may or may not have recently been let go from Britain's Got Talent, or one of the other comedians that it's an open secret have done some horrific crimes, but in my head, of course Brand would be in the mix. If they're going to expose comedians for these crimes, he'll be in there. I didn't think it'd be the sole focus, but what I didn't expect was how far it went. The actual grooming, the picking women out of an audience for sex, it was very, and pardon me for going there, Savile-esque. And you have to ask yourself, as someone who grew up in Britain in the era where Russell Brand's star was rising, how was it that he got away with this for so long, and not just got away with it, but was propped up by writers, producers, actors, agents, and legions of people who worked with him, who from the evidence we have now must have known exactly what was going on. The people involved in the Satsgate incident that got him fired from Radio 2, Jonathan Ross, David Baddiel, did they know? And how exactly do we deal with a media culture that can let a monster like Jimmy Savile reign terror via the smokescreen of celebrity for decades, only for the same to happen, albeit on a perhaps smaller scale, decades later? Even if, as you might point out, the public didn't know the details about the Savile case until Brand had already made his career, people still knew. This was an open secret. People were scarred, and yet they continued to perpetuate these horrors year after year, bringing new monsters into the fold, continuing the same cycle of abuse in the same institutions. So, what the hell is wrong with British media culture? How did Brand's obvious misogyny go unremarked for so long? And why does Britain's media sphere continue to hide and prop up the careers of predators whose crimes are an open secret? I'd be, of course, lying if I said I had all the answers, but I do have some thoughts. I think people forget how misogynistic the 2000s and 2010s were, which is strange when you think about it, because Gamergate and the resulting misogynistic harassment of Anita Sarkeesian, Zoe Quinn, Brianna Wu, and others was deep into the 2010s. In fact, the 2014 to 2015 peak of Gamergate, before its dying embers produced 1,000 smaller horrors, from Steve Bannon's campaign to launch global fascism to Graham Linehan becoming so transphobic he lost his wife and kids over it, was but an eruption to the surface of the misogyny that had been bubbling like magma underneath 2000s and 2010s culture up to that point. People who remember 4chan or any of its associated sites would be hard-pressed to tell you that the early 21st century was enlightened, let alone feminist. In fact, those of us who grew up in this period will remember well that it wasn't until after Gamergate, and even then, for a lot of people, after the Me Too movement took off, that it became a common thing to call yourself a feminist in public. Certainly in the early days of the internet, feminism was seen as a dirty word by many. And lest we forget, even the mainstream was in on this too. Have you tried watching How I Met Your Mother since it came out? Barney Stinson was seen as a bit too much at the time, but now? Jesus Christ, I mean, making a most comic relief character just a straight-up predator was just an acceptable thing, apparently. Beyond How I Met Your Mother, look at 2.5 Men. Its whole premise is basically laughing at this misogynistic predator that we're meant to empathize with. All of this is not to say that any particular media property or any singular person is responsible for this culture of harassment and worse. Of course not. But that the popularity of media in which misogyny is not only normalized but celebrated is a symptom of an environment in which sexism and violence against women is taught as a fact of life. And more than that, something one should expect and even be expected to participate in. with this attitude culminating in the lad culture, as we would call it in the UK, of the early 21st century.
I love being a man. I love sport, beers and banter. I've catcalled, I've woof whistled, I've sung songs like I wish that all the ladies were buns in the oven, and I was a baker, I'd cream them by the dozen.
An article I was reading for this video from the journal Gender Studies had this to say about lad culture by way of the National Union of Students, which I found quite enlightening. They defined lad culture as a group mentality articulated through activities such as sport and heavy alcohol consumption, and characterized by sexist and homophobic banter. Subsequent discussions in political and media arenas linked it to broader terms such as sex object culture, popularized by the campaign Object, and rape culture, developed by US feminists in the 1970s. The latter refers to a set of general cultural beliefs supporting men's violence against women, including the idea that this violence is a fact of life, that there is an association between violence and sexuality, that men are active while women are passive, and that men have a right to sexual intercourse. These also produce prevalent rape myths, such as that women enjoy being raped, and give credence to the idea that there are blurred lines around consent, which has generated widespread disbelief of victims and low conviction rates of perpetrators. This was the zeitgeist of the era people of my generation grew up in. Misogyny was in the bones of society, even as it insisted that gender equality had long ago been achieved. Things could only get better, right? We'll go back to that. The thing is, if you looked for longer than 3 seconds at, well, anything, you would see that lad culture was not just a weird subculture of manhood that perpetuated competitive and sometimes self-harming behaviour, but something that had misogyny at its core. Following the Me Too movement, a lot of the people that had proudly leaned into this lad culture, with its degrading of women, obsession with objectification, and competition among men, would claim to be feminists. Some, I assume, were sincere. Others, well, were Russell Brand. Personally, I got involved in feminism during the fashioning of the online skeptic community around Elevatorgate. I won't get into the specifics, and please forgive me for once having been part of the skeptic community, but in short, the endless misogynistic harassment against Rebecca Watson at that time by people who insisted feminism is cancer and that sexism wasn't a problem was enough to shake my teenage idiot self into seeing just how bad things were. And frankly, it shouldn't have taken me that long or taken that much evidence. I'm ashamed that it took such overwhelming evidence for me to wake up, but thankfully wake up I did. Part of me would like to shortcut my naivety to growing up in the end of history where supposedly all social problems were solved and things could only get better, but then, oops, 9/11, the financial crash. Turns out all of our problems never went away either, and the only people for which it felt like everything would be great forever were well-off straight white men in the West. That's not an excuse. That's not an excuse. I was blinded by my privilege until the evidence was right in front of me. And frankly, that's kind of shit. Why did it take me so long? A paper from Sociology in 2014 that I'll link down below has some thoughts linking neoliberalization of higher education and lad cultures in a way that rings true to my own experiences, where in an increasingly financialized world, laddish masculinity, with its competitiveness and misogyny, is encouraged and even marketed. In a world where profit is king, whatever sells, no matter how vile, is encouraged. And when competitiveness is prioritized over cooperation, this can encourage people to try and outdo each other, essentially leading them to try and one-up each other's misogyny, with the institutions that have the power to discipline people for misogynistic behavior being incentivized to cover it up, to preserve marketability. After all, how do you sell people on a university that's produced horrible experiences for half the student population? This neoliberalization, however, goes beyond the education sector. The trend of the new lads comedians such as Frank Skinner and David Baddiel, the emergence and rapid rise in popularity of lads mags too, whose appeal went beyond just pictures of breasts. In fact, it's in reference to these lads mags where the paper really gets to the heart of what lad culture is, and how deeply connected it is to the way sexism expressed itself in the early 21st century. Recent research found that members of the public could not differentiate between the language used by lads magazines and that of convicted sex offenders. However, another key characteristic of ladism is the inbuilt defensive irony, which attempts to deflect criticism of these excesses with disclaimers of humour. As Benwell argues, this is often strategically deployed, functioning to give voice to reactionary, anti-feminist, and homophobic sentiments while remaining ambiguous and evasive. And thus room is made for comedians to tap into this lad's humour, to make their entire brand a sort of semi-ironic misogyny that they can sell as an act, when really, the ironic humour is not there necessarily to make light of otherwise heavy topics, but instead to deflect from the actual pain and harm of these things, to provide a defence for your violent behaviour. to form a shield behind which people can perpetuate horrific acts and then retreat to a safe place of it's all just banter. How do you argue with that? If you challenge this, then, well, the obvious answer is you just can't take a joke. So you can see how this culture gets perpetuated.
Women, don't expect any help on a Thursday. Nuts, the new magazine for men, every Thursday.
Even after Me Too, this culture has not gone away. It has shifted somewhat into the camps largely of those who will call themselves feminists while exploiting women, like Russell Brand himself, and to people who've done away with the pretense of humour that previously acted as a shield from accusations of misogyny. You got Andrew Tate, for example, the mask-off misogynists, an ever-popular movement for all of its dangers, and just as enticing to young men if the story is to be believed as lad culture was to my generation. A terrifying thought, but unfortunately something we need to understand to move forward and to fight this monstrous movement.
The woman! What? No, wait. We love women. We love women.
But not like transgenders.
Yes, sir. We love everybody.
Coming back from a societal to an individual level, a lot of people have a hard time relating to problems they don't necessarily personally experience, it seems. Which sucks. Empathy should be second nature to all of us, but I think for a lot of people, their very sense of comfort relies on imagining that the world they live in is, for want of a better word, less fucked up than it is in certain ways. Because if misogyny is as bad as we know it to be, if we live in our culture, which actively covers up horrific crimes against women on the regular, then surely it's your moral duty, once you know about it, to do something about it. Or perhaps you might yourself be guilty, and then you have to reckon with that. What if your behaviour wasn't just banter? What if boys will be boys isn't a good excuse? What if you really hurt someone, and accepting the truth means you have to admit that to yourself, and you have to live with that? You have to deal with the knowledge that you did something really bad, that you hurt someone, and that you probably will never be able to make up for that, never be able to make it better, never be able to earn forgiveness, and that you might not even deserve forgiveness. That's gonna hurt, and admitting that is scary, but it's also necessary. If you want to live with your eyes open and become a better person, at least. That existential horror of realizing that the lad culture you lived in was a smokescreen, that you did some truly horrible things, is something a lot of people just refuse to own up to. We all like to think of ourselves as the hero in our own story. Well, most of us anyway. How can we square that with knowing that in someone's life, we've been the villain? I think, unfortunately, this logic, this defensiveness and fear, leads to defending misogyny in the status quo for a lot of people, and even to defending alleged predators like Russell Brand. People sometimes project themselves onto these situations, normalize it, and when one person does it, the people around them are more likely to do it too. Call it peer pressure or just not wanting to cause tension within a group. Lad culture in the UK was all about this. This open misogyny that had some air of being just human nature. Nuts and Zoo magazines first began publication around the same time Russell Brand's star was rising, and they are born of a similar culture, inherited from the past, sure, but with its own 21st century spin. A sort of, oh, we know it's naughty, but that's just been one of the lads shtick. A normalization of misogyny is just a part of what it means to be a man. Toxic masculinity in action, that's what it means. If you're a real man, according to this ideology, you'll objectify women. If you're a real man, you'll make jokes at women's expense. This toxic behavior can snowball into harassment and abuse. If part of being a man involves demeaning women, those insecure in their masculinity or itching to prove themselves see that society has painted a target on the backs of over half the population. Degrading them will equal higher status. And the locus of lad culture, teenage boys and young adult men, are full of hormones, insecure as fuck, often, and desperate to prove themselves. Our culture's messaging encourages them to perform misogyny, and to make that part of their identity, even. And it is in an environment like this that figures like Brand can hide in plain sight. Because how many men have you met that make misogynistic remarks as a joke? Hell, I've heard worse than that. I've had teenagers threatening to R-word me as a joke on public transport just this year. That as a joke should be in heavy scare quotes, by the way. When this is encouraged and made the norm, is it any wonder the general public didn't see that Brand's stage persona was not just an act, and that he was telling us who he was? Now, the people that propped him up, that's another story. There are allegations against Brand going back decades at this point. In 2006, Danny Minogue accused Russell Brand of sexual harassment, describing him as a bit of a vile predator who wouldn't take no for an answer. This was at the height of his career, and I don't even remember this making the news. In 2007, multiple complaints about Brand's behaviour were made to the then controller of BBC Radio 2. These were ignored, and Brand was eventually fired for a prank call where Brand and notorious transphobe Jonathan Ross left an answer phone message for Andrew Sachs, a 78-year-old actor, telling him that Brand had fucked his granddaughter, an incident that led to them both leaving the BBC. This had nothing to do with these earlier complaints. In 2018, Catherine Ryan called Russell Brand a predator multiple times during filming of the comedy show. None of these accusations made it to air, despite them being in the format of the show itself. Brand was apparently furious. Only this year, with these allegations coming to light, did Brand's agency drop him. Only after the allegations came out did YouTube suspend Brand's ability to monetize his content on the platform. I didn't even mention the numerous claims made in the Dispatches documentary here, which are worse, much worse than the scant few things I mentioned here. For the entire time these events were happening, Russell Brand was protected by agents, by producers, by executives who cared more about getting eyes on their content than about the safety of the women Brand was notorious for preying upon. Brand's predatory behaviour was an open secret, and yet he kept getting hired, and people kept suffering. All of this could have been prevented. Don't hire predators. It's that simple. If you're that desperate for the lad's demographic, hire someone that doesn't abuse women. If you must have someone on who is known for making misogynistic jokes and waxing poetic about how much he likes to bang teenagers, no. In fact, no, don't do that. Why do you need to do that? That's the fucking problem, isn't it? That's the problem right there. Why is that necessary? Why do we need a voice spewing misogyny from the TV at all hours? Ultimately, there are people in creative control of TV networks, newspapers, and yes, YouTube, who at any time could choose to pull the plug on this shit, and as a result, overnight reduce the amount of misogynistic bile people are exposed to. But they don't, because they only care about money, not about their responsibilities to their audience, to their employees, to society. Just about money, about viewership, about pleasing the right people, about attracting advertisers. The profit motive in our media is actively dangerous for women, because there will always be a market for this toxic shit. Because it's an easy answer for men who are angry to blame all their troubles on women. It's an easy answer for men who are lonely or feel disrespected to climb the social hierarchy by feeding into this toxic ladder of misogyny. And these easy answers get people hurt, get people argued, get people killed. If you're hiring someone you know to be a predator because you think it will draw people in, I hope you can live with the guilt of knowing that you are perpetuating harm. You have blood on your hands, whether you can dissociate from it or not. Much like Savile before him, Brand's behaviour, his personality, wearing his misogyny out in the open was celebrated, seen as part of what made him charming. It was an aspect that made the character of Russell Brand, his personal branding, for lack of a better word. Just as Savile's media personality combined his Savilisms with the horrific way he talked about women and how basically open he was about his crimes. In fact, in the wake of the accusations against Savile, the people who had propped him up over the years responded with not only denial, but concern that the revelations would jeopardize Savile's charitable legacy, with even the great bastion of impartiality, the BBC, claiming, "The BBC has conducted extensive searches of its files to establish whether there is any record of misconduct or allegations of misconduct by Sir Jimmy Savile during his time at the BBC. No such evidence has been found. Whilst the BBC condemns any behaviour of the type alleged in the strongest terms, in the absence of evidence of any kind found at the BBC that corroborates the allegations to be made, it is simply not possible for the corporation to take further action." Of course, now we know that that's simply not true. Similar responses were given by companies that have worked with Brand over the years in the last few days. Not only do people want to wash their hands of the scandal they helped perpetuate, they want to insist they never knew anything and that no records exist, because their reputation is more important to them than accounting for the harm they have done and the many victims of their negligence. Predators thrive in environments with other predators. They protect each other. An environment that protected Savile gives room for Russell Brand and more besides. I'm sure, since there has been no reform of our media institutions since, well, ever, that these problems persist and unfortunately will into the future, unless people are willing to speak out, which is a big risk to themselves and others. The UK media is a cesspit. It's famously toxic, even as Murdoch-dominated Anglophone news environments go, and it doesn't seem committed to change. On the contrary, the very newspapers reporting on Brand's abuse today have protected him and others like him in the past. Some of them even have known abusers writing for them or working for them. To really solve this problem, we need accountability for these institutions, regulation, democratic control, anything beyond what we have now, which is a bunch of billionaire abusers in suits encouraging the worst people in the world to run amok as long as it makes them money. We need people to stop these predators before they become household names. Lord knows the warning signs were there from the start. Russell Brand was on his bullshit from his very first TV job. We need people there to stop this, and on top of all of this, we need to foster an environment in which women can feel safe coming forward, being open about the horrors they've endured, instead of being scared, justifiably, that they will lose their careers, their friends, their family, everything. If they open up about people who've abused them, we need to forge a society that gives space and safety to victims, and makes it easier to topple these celebrities. A world where victims of SA cannot be silenced by expensive lawyers and threats. A society that puts victims first. A society that cares about the civilian just as much, if not more, than it cares about the celebrity. A society where the rich do not have power over the poor. Perhaps a society where there are no rich people at all. Wouldn't that be nice? Solidarity to the victims. This is a horrific situation, and I'm so sorry this stuff keeps happening. Next week's video, I promise, will be a lot lighter. Until then, believe women, fuck Russell Brand, don't hire predators, and be aware that there are a lot more people in the UK comedy scene who are open secrets. Be on the lookout for them. Protect the vulnerable where you can. Make sure you are there to support your friends and those around you. Make it your duty to become a safe person to turn to. When these attacks happen, community is everything. Okay, bye. Hey everyone, thank you for watching. I know this was a heavy one. I promise next week will be much more fun. I've already filmed it. I'm ready. It's not going to be depressing, I promise. Oh no. Thank you so much for watching. And if you have some money lying around and you think I deserve some because I would like some because I am poor, you can pay me on Coffee or PayPal at Bridget Empire, BRIGITTEEMPIRE, or Catherine Strickson, that's CATHERINESTRICKSON @gmail.com, respectively. I would like to pay my groceries by the end of the year with this money, so if you could give anything, it would really, really help. So, yeah, I'm trying to make this sound cherry, but there's no real way to segue from this subject, so I'm just going to mention right now that, you know, if you want to join my Patreon, which you should, the Patreon's the best bit, you can get a bunch of stuff. You'll get early access to my videos, exclusive content, get to join the Patreon's Discord, you get my Nintendo Switch friend code, discounts on any future merch, and you also get my name, get your name even, right at the end of each video. And the people who help me not starve will be read now, and they are. Joey Cobalt, Scarjan, Narania, Lara Van Loon, Howard Lott, Jay Peterson, Alexandra Lilly, Carolyn Regalado, Deanna McMillan, No Kings, Only Fools, Greg Noble, Hayden Gala, Artie Wolf, 4IS, Meredith Matthews, Soma Piglet, Apostrophe Hyphen, Belligerent Kitten, Philippa Taproga, Sleepy Slug, Courtney Burmack, Manta Ray, Terry Roberts, Casual Observer, Exploding Turtle, and Infernal Ramblings. Thank you all so much for helping me.